Officially, Russia has opened a new front and captured 4 villages in the Sumy region. The Kremlin is wearing down Ukraine's air defense by launching decoy drones. Fico has gone too far. Europe wants to cut off funding for Slovakia. In the coming days, Russia will present its peace plan with a specific date for ending the war. Trump is preparing a powerful blow against Russia. New sanctions are coming as early as this week. Has Europe secretly allowed strikes on Moscow with Western missiles? Hello, my name is Katerina Pakalchuk, and I'll tell you what's happening with Ukraine today. Let's start with the front lines. Russia is changing the direction of its offensive. The occupiers are redeploying their forces from Donetsk to the Sumy region. Such a redeployment indicates an attempt to shift the focus of offensive operations. This is stated in a report by the Institute for the Study of War. The document cites information from Ukrainian military expert Konstantin Mashovets, who reported that the Russian military command recently redeployed units of the 752nd Motorized Rifle Regiment and the 200th Motorized Rifle Brigade to reinforce the offensive in the northern direction of the Sumy region. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War state that since the summer of 2023, the 200th Brigade has been observed participating in battles in the Bakhmut-Chasiv Yar direction, which was considered a priority for the Russians. The most recent confirmation of their presence in Chasiv Yar dates back to May 6th. However, there is currently no independent confirmation that these same forces are actively operating in the Sumy region. Analysts suggest that the redeployment of forces from near Chasiv Yar may indicate a temporary pause in plans for an offensive on Kostiantynivka.
The decision by the Russian military command to redeploy units from all directions indicates that Russian forces may attempt to simultaneously continue their push in the Donetsk region and create a buffer zone in the north of the Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions. However, the Russian military command may assess that Russian forces have a greater chance of making significant advances in the north of the Sumy region than near Chasiv Yar.
The day before, the head of the Sumy Regional Military Administration, Oleg Ryhorov, officially reported that as of May 26th, Russian forces had temporarily occupied the settlements of Novenki and Basivka in the Yunakivka community, as well as Veselivka and Zhuravka in the Kotin community of the Sumy region. But that's not all. According to the spokesperson of the State Border Guard Service, Andriy Demchenko, the Russians are trying to expand the directions of their assaults in the Sumy region. The Russians are attempting to carry out offensive actions with small assault groups.
The most active area is in the direction of the settlements of Vasivka and Zhuravka, but in recent days we have seen that the enemy is trying to expand the directions where they are using this tactic. To the left of Zhuravka, this is in the direction of the settlements of Volodymyrivka and Veselivka.
For his part, President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that despite all the declarations about striving for peace, Russia does not plan to end the war. Instead, the occupiers are preparing for a new offensive. According to the president, this is confirmed by intelligence information and open sources.
There is a lot of evidence that they are preparing new offensive operations. Russia is counting on continuing the war, and this is a blatant disregard on their part for everyone in the world who seeks peace and who is trying to make diplomacy effective. I am confident that the intelligence services of our partners also have this information. The only thing needed now is completely honest conclusions and appropriate joint pressure on Russia.
And finally, a bit of positivity. Footage is being published online showing a Ukrainian MiG-29 with a Hammer aerial bomb likely destroying an FSB officers base in the Belgorod region. But no matter how difficult things get, we keep our fingers crossed for our armed forces. Like this video and write words of support for our defenders, both men and women. We know that they are watching us. We've already told you that Russia will soon be able to attack Ukraine with 1,000 drones at once. For now, such a massive attack is only in the planning stages, but Russia is preparing and has started to exhaust Ukrainian air defenses with decoys. According to Yuri Ignat, head of the communications department of the Air Force Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, about 40% of the drones launched are fake. From these statistics, we can conclude that our defenders know how to distinguish between real and fake drones. And they do it incredibly quickly, just by the sound.
Shahed imitators are made so that we think it's a Shahed, right? But now people on the ground have learned to distinguish them not only visually, but also by sound, and even by flight characteristics. It's clear that it's not a Shahed, but an imitation drone. This takes time and, of course, experience.
But in addition to using decoys, Russia has also changed its drone tactics.
The current Russian tactic comes down to constantly changing the UAV routes and trying to launch them at high altitudes, over 2 kilometers above the ground, and then diving them directly down onto the target. At such an altitude, they become more visible to our radars, but remain out of reach for small arms, heavy machine guns, and mobile fire teams.
However, our defenders are constantly learning to meet these new challenges. Give a like to thank our sky defenders. Another drone attack on Russia. This time, 2 Russian regions were targeted, Bryansk and Vladimir Oblasts. Preliminarily, the Murom instrument-making plant in Vladimir Oblast was attacked. Flight restrictions were imposed at many airports. And as usual, the Russian Ministry of Defense has claimed that all 99 drones were shot down. I would like to note that this enterprise manufactures products used in the war against Ukraine. We're talking about ignition devices for munitions, as well as components for the Russian Navy and military aviation. A rotten sheep must be driven out of the flock. Putin's friends, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, because of their anti-European stance, risk leaving their countries without European Union funding. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that if Hungary and Slovakia continue to deviate from the agreed course of development of the European Union, they will face severe punishment.
We will not be able to avoid this conflict with Hungary and Slovakia if we continue on this path. We cannot allow the decisions of the entire EU to depend on a small minority, and certainly there could be stronger words and perhaps tougher conflicts.
There has long been talk about punishing Hungary in particular because due to Orban's policies, the country is violating the fundamental values of the European Union. These facts have been under investigation since 2018. The EU has already suspended funding to Hungary, and recently there was talk of stripping Hungary of its voting rights in the European Union, but unfortunately it didn't work out.
To apply Article 7 Part 1 of the Treaty on the EU to Hungary, which is currently on the agenda and provides for issuing a warning to a state where there is a risk of violating the fundamental values of the EU, there are not enough votes. To approve the warning, a 20th vote out of the 27 member states is required. At the moment, there are not enough votes in favor.
But considering that there have already been precedents of suspending funding, a decision to apply financial pressure on Hungary and Slovakia could be a positive one. Not just ultimatums, but an entire peace plan. The press attaché of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova, stated that the Kremlin is working very actively on its own peace plan. And in the so-called memorandum, they will outline not only the principles of settlement, but even the timelines. In other words, they will actually specify when the war will end.
Russia continues to work on a draft memorandum regarding a future peace agreement, defining a number of positions such as the principles of settlement, the possible time frame for concluding a peace agreement, and the potential for a temporary ceasefire if, I emphasize, the appropriate agreements are reached. As soon as the memorandum is prepared, and I want to note that the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov literally comments on its progress every day, it will be handed over to Kyiv.
I'm not an expert, but I've heard so many Russian promises, ultimatums, and plans that I can already predict the approximate content of this memorandum. The war will end when Russia returns the territories of Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk regions to Ukrainian control, and as a bonus, also Kharkiv and Sumy regions. And of course, all of this is on the condition that Ukraine reduces the size of its armed forces and gives up on joining the EU and NATO. Oh, and also the election of a new president. In short, the memorandum will be yet another demand for capitulation, which Ukraine will never agree to. There is still a month until the new NATO summit, and Alliance Secretary General Mark Rutte is already worried. The New York Times writes that Rutte is worried that Trump and Zelensky could ruin his summit in The Hague with yet another quarrel.
The head of NATO wants next month's annual alliance summit to be short and pleasant, say European officials and diplomats, in order to prevent an open split over Ukraine that overshadowed the meeting 2 years ago. But two things could force the Secretary General of the alliance, Mark Rutte, to preside over a more complicated event. President Trump, who is expected to attend, has disagreements with allies over Ukraine's future. And Ukraine itself wants to join NATO, something Mr. Trump does not agree with.
The tension has reached the point where the organization still hasn't decided whether to invite the Ukrainian president to the summit's main dinner. On the one hand, recalling the quarrel at the White House, the concern is partly justified. But after the meeting at the Vatican, it seems that the tension between Trump and Zelensky is no longer there. What do you think? Will there be a new quarrel, or will Trump finally direct his anger at Putin? Share your thoughts in the comments.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
The stories of our defenders who survived Russian prisons make your blood run cold. But not everyone will be able to tell their story because Russia is killing Ukrainian prisoners of war. According to the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine, out of the 5,000 of our soldiers who were exchanged, at least 206 died in captivity. More than 50 of them died tragically in Olenivka. Another 245 people who surrendered were killed by the Russians on the battlefield. I think you have seen the horrific footage of our captured soldiers being executed. As for those who managed to return alive from captivity, according to the UN, 95% of released Ukrainian prisoners of war were subjected to systematic torture, beatings, electric shocks, suffocation, sexual violence, prolonged stress positions, mock executions, and sleep deprivation. This once again reminds the whole world Russia is a terrorist state. Like this video if you agree with this statement. Now, on a different note, the US and the European Union are no longer cooperating on sanctions policy against Russia, or more precisely, on combating Russia's evasion of sanctions.
The problem is that the United States of America was, in fact, the driving force behind the sanctions regime. If the Trump administration seeks to normalize relations with Russia, it will mean the end of the global sanctions regime.
As a result, there will be a complete collapse of transatlantic coordination. It even comes down to the fact that cooperation in this regard is now impossible, even at the G7 level. Any split, of course, benefits Russia. But in my opinion, things aren't so bad if the rumors about Trump imposing sanctions against Russia turn out to be true. What do you think? Is the US-EU alliance on sanctions over? The long-awaited decision has been made. The day before the media was full of headlines, Ukraine allowed to strike deep into Russia with Western weapons. The statement is attributed to German Chancellor Merz. However, just a few hours later, the same Merz states that there are no new decisions regarding Ukraine. And everything seems crystal clear, if not for a few buts. At the very least, the fact that decisions regarding Ukraine are supposed to be classified, while Russia is convening an emergency meeting at the UN over this. So could Ukraine actually have such permission, and how far could it reach into Russian territory? Veronika Veremeyeva will tell you more about this next.
Just recently, a piece of news suddenly and unexpectedly exploded in the media space. Western partners have allowed Ukraine to strike deep into Russia with their weapons, specifically Britain, France, and Germany. This was reported by Western media, quoting the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz.
Now, strikes on Russian territory using Western long-range weapons are permitted. This means that Kiev can now use Western weapons to strike targets deep behind enemy lines, which significantly expands the capabilities of the Ukrainian armed forces on the front.
And just as we started to rejoice at this news, about 8 hours later, the Chancellor of Germany effectively denies the permission.
As for the scope of use, I would like to say that at this time there is no new formal agreement or arrangement that goes beyond what the previous government did.
And here we could have said, well, it happens. We're already used to the indecisiveness of our partners, so there's no permission now either. But such conclusions can only be drawn if you look at the situation superficially, and only by taking a closer look does a logical question arise. Is there really no permission after all? Let's try to figure this out together. The first thing that makes us doubt is another statement by Merz, which he made on May 10th. At that time, he announced the cessation of publicly disclosing details of military aid to Ukraine. In this way, according to him, Russia is deprived of a tactical advantage. So, it is quite possible that information about the permission to strike at longer ranges might simply not be disclosed, so that it remains a secret from Russia. And it must be acknowledged that Merz's statement that there are no new agreements is not the same as if he had said, no, there is no permission to strike deep into Russia with our weapons. In other words, the statement itself does not provide a clear understanding. Is it definitely no or definitely yes? Another interesting point. After the information about the permission was made public, the press also began to write that Germany might transfer Taurus missiles to Ukraine. And here we return once again to Merz's statements made on May 10th, when he refused to either confirm or deny the possible transfer of these very Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine, citing the new confidentiality policy. So once again, there is no clear denial. If we move away from the statements coming from Europe, we do have confirmation that permission might actually be granted, judging by Russia's panicked statements. They want to convene an entire UN meeting over this.
Russia is convening an emergency UN meeting due to concerns that European countries are threatening its security and hindering the resolution of the Ukrainian crisis.
And it's interesting, why is Russia reacting so quickly and actively if in fact there is no actual permission? And how, in their opinion, is Europe interfering with the resolution of the situation in Ukraine? In short, they're losing their minds over there. And as we know, that's usually how Russia reacts when Western partners increase their support for Ukraine. Another reason to doubt that there is no permission is the fact that after Russia's nightly attacks for 3 days in a row, everyone in Ukraine became completely convinced Russia does not want peace. And such a decision by Europe could very well be a response to Russia's aggressive behavior. In other words, Europe has finally run out of patience. And overall, it's quite interesting that there was such a long pause between when the information about the permission appeared and its so-called denial. Usually denials are issued much faster, but here it took almost 8 hours. It is quite possible that the European political elites wanted to see the public's reaction by making such an apparent leak. This tactic is often used to gauge, so to speak, the mood of society. And now let's assume that we do, in fact, have permission. If the Taurus missiles are indeed delivered, what does this mean for Ukraine? Our colleagues from the publication Focus have conducted an analysis.
It allows the missile to fly at low and extremely low altitudes, avoiding enemy radars and air defense systems, and also to adjust its course without GPS, which is critically important under conditions of electronic warfare. Thus, the Taurus combines long-range, stealth, and high precision. In addition, unlike HIMARS and ATACMS, which are limited by the number of launches, the Taurus can be integrated onto Western-type aircraft, primarily F-16 fighter jets.
Also, if the restriction on strikes deep inside Russia is lifted and Germany supplies them, Ukraine will receive one of the most powerful cruise missiles in Europe, capable of operating autonomously and precisely destroying Russia's critically important targets even at great distances. Of course, these are just our assumptions, but as we know, where there's smoke, there's fire. And what do you think about all of this? Do you believe that Europe has really secretly given Ukraine permission to strike deep inside Russia with its weapons? I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts below this video.
Poland and Lithuania are preparing for a Russian invasion. Residents of the Suwałki corridor are leaving the region en masse, fearing an attack by Russians from both sides. This is reported by the German outlet Bild. It is noted that the Suwałki corridor is the most vulnerable spot in the defense of NATO's eastern flank. It is only 65 kilometers wide, and in the event of war, Russian artillery would be able to bring the entire area under fire control. This corridor connects Lithuania with Poland and separates Belarus from the Russian Kaliningrad region. Let me remind you, this September, Russian-Belarusian exercises called Zapad 2025 will take place near the borders of Europe, which are causing concern among neighboring countries. Bild writes that these exercises will be the latest in a series of maneuvers that Russia and Belarus have been conducting jointly since 2009. The largest of these, Zapad 2021, which involved more than 200,000 participants, became part of the preparations for Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Since then, Western countries have been closely monitoring Russia's activities near the Suwałki corridor, as its strategic importance for the security of the region is extremely high.
Of course, we all want peace in Ukraine, but we also have to be honest and say that if the war continues, Zapad 2025 will remain just a maneuver since the decisive forces are engaged elsewhere. If it ends on Russia's terms, the West could start a new war against us.
The fact that Russia is preparing for war against Europe is also confirmed by the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation, Andriy Kovalenko. North Korea could help Russia prepare for this with manpower and weapons.
This is a very real threat, which is finally being recognized in Europe. It's very good that the illusions have been dispelled, because if they hadn't, in 4 to 6 years, Russia and its allies could have attacked the Baltics not just in a hybrid way, as they are doing now.
I wonder what the Russians and Belarusians are actually planning. What do you think? Are they bluffing with their exercises and just trying to intimidate? Or could they actually move against the Baltic countries and Poland? Poland will build the largest logistics hub in Europe, the creation of which was announced by Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. This hub is planned to be located in the city of Sławków in Silesia, near Katowice, based on the existing Euroterminal. It will play a key role in the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine. This was reported by the Polish TV channel TVN24.
I'll say this without any exaggeration. Here in Sławków in Silesia, we have the largest logistics hub of this kind in Europe. There's nothing wrong with saying that. We want to make big money for Poland by rebuilding Ukraine. We want to help, but we also want to profit from it, and that's why this special hub is needed.
It is claimed that the Euroterminal in Sławków has a unique location at the junction of the standard European railway gauge and the broad gauge, which is used among others in Ukraine. This makes it possible to efficiently transfer cargo between east and west. After modernization, the terminal's capacity will increase from 285,000 to over 500,000 standard containers per year. The Polish authorities emphasize that the logistics center will not only facilitate trade, but will also become an economic pillar in the process of Ukraine's reconstruction. In addition, according to Donald Tusk, in the future, Sławków could become a key hub for cargo arriving by rail from Asia to the EU. Well, the plans are ambitious. What do you think? Is it a good idea? U.S. President Donald Trump is considering imposing new sanctions against Russia, possibly as early as this week. The Wall Street Journal, citing sources close to Trump, claims that the American president is disappointed by the latest shelling of Ukraine ordered by the Russian dictator Putin and by the slow pace of peace negotiations. According to the sources, the restrictions are unlikely to include new banking sanctions, but other options are being discussed to force Putin to make concessions at the negotiating table. However, there is another possibility. The Wall Street Journal writes that Trump may decide not to impose new sanctions at all.
President Trump has made it clear that he wants a peace agreement, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in a comment to the Wall Street Journal. At the same time, according to her, Trump is keeping all options on the table.
But that's not all. Sources cited by the publication note that Trump is tired of peace talks and is considering pulling out if this final push doesn't work. So will there be new sanctions, and will Trump withdraw from the negotiations? Share your thoughts. It would be interesting to read them. That's all for now. Give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. And then we'll definitely see each other again.